It's been 10 years, Mr. Vilppu. It's been 10 years of New Masters Academy, 10, 11 years of Vilppu Academy. Went from an idea to tens of millions of video views, a huge community, changing the way everybody teaches art instruction. Everybody's copying Vilppu Academy. Everybody's copying New Masters Academy. We don't care. We love it because we're trying to change the world of art. That's what we were talking about over coffee in your house and in my house 11 years ago. How do we fix this art education problem, or how do we improve it? How do we make it affordable and less elite? And now we get to celebrate 10 years. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Been great. I remember, when you were helping me start the Vilppu Academy, and you come up and you're driving up, and you were sitting in the class. You say, "Well, you ought to do these videos." I was doing videos, but you said, "Well, you ought to start doing this stuff online." And I said, "Yeah, okay."
I needed something to trade for my apprenticeship. I needed something to.
Well, yeah.
I needed something to sell you.
Then about a year later, you said, "Well, I think I'm going to start the New Masters Academy." And I said, "Well, sure, I'll chip in. Anybody need?"
You'll chip in a few hundred hours of content. Yeah. Well, this whole week has been just celebrations. We've had Q&As and drawing demos, and we had a fashion show that was so cool, an NMA prom fashion show. We had a student showcase of art yesterday that was, Glenn, it's unbelievable the progress these students are making, whether they're beginners or if they're literally professionals are coming in here as well. And obviously we've trained so many professionals. We've been used to train studios. We've been used at the top art schools as group coaching, as a group training. But just seeing how every single person who was submitting was just making such a transformative change. And one thing I was talking about during the student showcase is that unlike an atelier, at New Masters Academy, their artwork still looks like them. It's just better. So we're not forcing them to become little Glenn Vilppus or little Miles Yoshidas or little Aristides. We're helping them grow. That's the power of the fundamentals, is that it doesn't need to look like our drawings. They look like their drawings, and they have their taste and their aesthetics and their loves, what they have, the interests in art, but it's just better. And I think that was really the goal of New Masters Academy right from the beginning, I'm sure you remember. Do you remember those meetings, Glenn, when we were together?
Yeah. Well, one of the primary things why it works so well, there's no bull.
Yeah. I learned that from you.
We're very straightforward. We call it the way it is. We're not taking and selling us individually as like, oh, this is the only way of doing it.
Oh, this is the Jacobo. It's the Jacobo technique. Like none of this crap. Well, I mean, Vilppu is a brand. I gotta say, like Vilppu means gesture. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but the whole key. No rules, remember, no rules, just tools.
Glenn, I got to tell you something you might find exciting. I was chatting with a language model, it was GPT-4, OpenAI's language model, and I was just curious. I asked who the most influential drawing, living instructor who teaches drawing alive, who is that? And the results, you were number 3. I think after Betty Edwards and Loomis, but you were number 3. So I just want to say I'm very grateful that we've got one of the most influential artists when it comes to drawing worldwide, that you've been able to be such a critical part of this. And really, I don't think there would be, there a lot of people contributed to New Masters Academy, but it's really, I think without you, it wouldn't have happened. I just wouldn't have had the energy or the guidance or the confidence to do it on my own, because I was still a student, I mean, obviously I was studying with amazing teachers like you, but it really had to happen with Glenn Vilppu. And I just want to say, I really appreciate everything you've done so far. And I'm sure there's many people here that feel the exact same way. It's like, it was maybe a niche thing in the past, but it's not niche anymore. There's millions of artists who have benefited from your teaching and the teaching that we've done here. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of all of them.
Well, it's a mutual thing.
Yeah.
I field. When I started out, how many teaching 60 some years ago, more than that, 65 years ago.
Damn.
At that point, I realized, and this is a short little story. I was
Please.
teaching at Art Center at the time, and we had a faculty Christmas dinner, and it was an audience, and we were in the auditorium. There were some tables around with drinks, and I might have had a couple.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, cut to the chase. You guys were drunk. Then what happened?
But there's one instructor who I really liked. He was really a nice guy, and very competent. But what he taught was
Sorry, who is this? What's the name of the instructor?
I'm trying to think of his name now, but it wasn't Fidelson or Carmine. It was some guy, an illustration instructor, but he was really nice. I can't think of his name, but he taught technique, the latest technique and things. And I was sitting here talking to him when I said, and this was so uncool. I said, if you teach fashion, you're teaching obsolescence. And it was really one of those points where I started out right away focusing on fundamentals.
Yeah.
And
when did you decide that the institutions, like I know you were head of the drawing program at Cal Arts, which was Disney's training program for animation. That's probably how you know Danny Galliotti, for example. I know you taught at Art Center from a young age, like 21, 22. But when did you decide that? Because I know you've done your own private studio classes, you've done your own school, and way before Vilppu Academy. Vilppu Academy is just the newest version of a Vilppu, production. But when did you decide that it was a better idea for you to separate and do an independent thing rather than fitting into the institutions that existed?
Well, to me, an institution is, first of all, the bureaucracy. And I realized, even when I was at Disney, and they were dead ends. Everything was focused on the wrong thing as far as I was concerned. And
do you think that came from financial pressures, or what the clients wanted, or what the parents of the students wanted, or what the industry? Where do you think that came from?
An institution has a huge overhead that it's got to support, and so they will go along with what's fashionable. Like universities, like say UCLA or Berkeley or whatever, so much of the stuff relies on donations, and you only get donations from wealthy people who are then involved with the gallery systems, which is a business.
Oh my God! You're telling me Santa's not real. What next?
Yeah, so it's and like the students, I get students all the time who they've gone through Berkeley. They say they're so angry because they just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and didn't learn a damn thing.
I've heard that story probably hundreds of times from students.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so unfortunate. So they start over. And so I tell people, it's the parents, of course, who want their kids to have degrees.
Of course. They want their kids to have a job. They don't want them moving back into the house. They're just like, go to a good school if you're going to do this.
Yeah, and which is understandable, So I always have to tell parents, well, yes, students should get an education. They should learn. They should know their philosophy. They should know all of that.
Yeah.
That's part of it, to get a degree. It'll help them. Maybe they're going to end up doing something where they need a degree.
Yeah.
But it's not going to make a damn difference in terms of being an artist.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned degrees, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but New Masters Academy has started down a process of getting accredited. So we are actually going to be able to, in the future, it's a pain in the butt. It's a lot.
Believe me, I know that.
Yeah. But we're actually going to be, in the future, there's going to be an optional way to do New Masters Academy and get credit. And what's interesting is that for the first stage of accreditation, Glenn, you have to meet all these requirements. Obviously, that's a big part of it. And New Masters Academy was actually overqualified for accreditation. which is very unusual because usually you have to step up your programs in order to qualify for the North American
Well,
the
and
acronym.
I do have my master's degree, so I'm very useful.
Yeah, that's the only reason you're useful, Glenn. But you know what, Glenn? I've actually got a bunch of questions that have been submitted from students, and so I want to get to those. Is it all right if I start asking you some of these questions?
Okay. Go
All
ahead.
right.
Shoot.
Okay, let's do it. Glenn, Maystorm asks, how does one build a lifelong artistic career?
It's called consistency. In other words, first of all, you have to take and believe in what you're doing. In other words, like I say, I started out with focus on fundamentals. As a teacher, I'm a teacher, okay, but I'm dedicated to drawing.
Yeah.
Well, in my day, when I was a student, drawing was already passé. You didn't have to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And so you have to take and focus on what do you believe in, but be consistent and don't follow if you try to follow the crowd, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
That's really the whole thing. And
yeah, I don't know what you mean. I have a lot of NFTs here, and I wanted to get you involved. Everybody here, we're going to make money on crypto and NFTs.
Yeah, you have to have your own thing that you are really passionate about, and just stick with it and follow it. And you may have to do all kinds of things to make a living, but that's what it is. I'm a teacher. I'm a drawing instructor, but I'm incredibly passionate about drawing. And if you go back, Michelangelo, whether it's Apelles, whoever, the one thing that they always say, draw.
Yeah. Draw,
and
don't waste time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did this drawing while I was waiting to get started with this. I did this drawing.
Please share.
I did this morning.
Right.
This is a half hour before we got together. Yeah.
Wow.
We were
Glenn, that sketchbook is very interesting. Could you, what is it? Do you like it?
Okay. This is called Stone.
Hold on. We need to get sponsored by these
guys.
Yeah,
the brand of it is something new. It's Karst. Karst. It's stone. It's natural stone. Yeah. It doesn't wrinkle. You can use watercolor on it. You can use any mirror. I've even tried oil paint on it. It works beautifully.
No, really?
And yeah.
Is it sort of like Bristol with the paint, like a Bristol board kind of a thing?
It's like it has a vellum surface. It's gorgeous. My problem right now is I have several other older sketchbooks that I haven't even opened. What am I going to do with them? I'm going to have to give them to my kids because I don't want to use them. I want to use this.
Somebody's saying give it to the new master students. I just saw something. Glenn, you mentioned the word fundamentals a moment ago when you were talking about drawing. Yeah. This is funny because when we started Vilppu Academy and New Masters Academy, or when you started, I was helping. When we did this, that was the content nobody had. There weren't fundamentals courses as part of the university system, as part of, whether it's Art Center or Ringling or whatever, New York Academy of Art, but also definitely not in the DVD space and definitely not online. I mean, we were the first subscription website for learning art. Other companies followed suit. But so that was actually something that I feel like it's really important to plant a flag. When we came up with the Drawing Fundamentals course for Vilppu Academy and then the Drawing Fundamentals content for New Masters, we were literally doing something that didn't exist. And now that has sort of become what a lot of other sites and a lot of other institutions are trying to integrate. And I happen to know that some of the universities in California or some of the private art schools have used some of our content as a outline for then developing their own drawing fundamentals courses, which they are then teaching at the university. So it's funny because it's not just the online space that has imitated the work that we've done here, but literally the universities are changing their curriculum to look more like our websites. Is that shocking to you? Is that surprising at all?
Well, we do something. We show people how to do something. we're not taking and teaching a philosophy, quote, of a certain kind of painting.
Yeah.
It's a very pragmatic type of thing. Like I've joked about that what I do. I sometimes say, well, I'm not teaching art. I'm the nuts and bolts guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sort of subversive. I do teach a little art,
Yeah.
but
Of course.
the idea is that you teach people how to actually do something that's practical.
Yeah.
And that makes the huge difference. That's why they are having to do, and I think in the universities they have to take and start doing it,
Yeah.
because they're looking around and realizing people, you're not getting to
Yeah.
what the people have to do, and that they are under a problem because
Yeah.
you take classes for units.
Yep.
They can't really take enough units to learn how to do something.
Yeah, it's this kind of the contemporary education system is this vestige of the Industrial Revolution, and it had a certain purpose in training people from leaving the rural areas to come and work in the mercantile factories and all these things. So there's this history of education that has shaped the university and the art school. But then, as I talked about in the forward to the new version of the Vilppu drawing manual, which everybody here, if you're listening to this, you definitely should get Glenn's book. This is a new hardcover version. It's amazing. But in that forward, I talked a lot about the master apprentice system. And I don't know if this is true for you, maybe you can say, but for me, when it comes to designing the online programs and designing the courseware and designing New Masters Academy, I keep coming back to this idea of master and apprentice. It's a tradition that's handed down. It's a craft. It's not some abstract, conceptual, Platonic thing. It is literally, it's a physical, performative activity. It's not that different than golf. It's not that different than making sushi. It's not that different than any other craft. And I find that is a little bit of a controversial opinion. I get blowback when I talk about art that way.
Joshua,
think about that.
I have been saying this. I think art schools, traditional like the university, they're the worst thing you can do. And that the apprentice system, I know you're getting a credit, but we're not the same.
Yeah.
You know, we're not like the university type thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting
the apprentice system is the way to learn.
Yeah,
it's
so
that in a sense, you might say you're my apprentice.
I think so. I tell this story sort of as a joke where I was like, because I was reading all the art history books, like especially like of the old masters, and I'm like, oh, I need to apprentice under a master, but I didn't know that wasn't a thing anymore that you could do. And so I was just like emailing you and showing up, and I'm like, it's so naive and stupid in retrospect. But for whatever reason, you decided to take me under your wing, and I think that changed the lives of millions of people. So I don't know what it was that made you do that, but I really am so grateful that you did. But Glenn, I do have another question. I want to keep going through these student questions here. So the next question is, Ale asks, how did you study anatomy and form when you were studying the fundamentals? When did you start studying the anatomy?
Okay, first of all, again, it's you follow your own thing. When I was a student, they would not teach anatomy because they thought it was academic. I had to teach myself. Okay, but every time when I would do a drawing, I would say, well, I don't know how that goes. I would, and then I would start digging out anatomy books. I've got a whole shelf full of anatomy books. Yeah. I would take them. Now we're talking way before computers and stuff. We're talking 1960. Yeah. Okay.
Damn, dude.
So we're talking 70 years ago already.
Imagining you like Mad Men. Yeah.
So, but I kept pursuing. I needed to know how things worked. Okay, to know that, first of all, if you're drawing where you're really focusing on how to draw, not the technique thing, okay, but you really understand something, you have to know it. You can't draw it if you don't know it. And so I would start taking, and I used to carry around a package of anatomy cards, like play cards. It was always like I was bringing them out and looking at them.
Oh, I
Yeah,
love that.
I got skeletons, and I would draw from them, and I kept adding and adding, and I started teaching it because the best way to learn something is to have to repeat it again and again and explain it.
Yeah.
And if I have to explain it, I had to be at least one day ahead of the student.
I learned that from you, Glenn. You're the one that turned me into a teacher instead of somebody who's in education and organizing it, because you told me, and Glenn, I got to say, Glenn, Steve Houston also told me this, which what the advice was, you should start teaching, because when you're teaching, you're gonna learn the concepts better, and by critiquing the students many times, you're gonna get so good, because you can look at any drawing and be like, boom, 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 this needs to move that. And I have to say that that is absolutely true. And I think that anyone listening to this, I think teaching is a really great way for artists to increase their skill, to get paid to do what you love. And it's a very direct app. I mean, there's a reason that people like Glenn Vilppu and Steve Houston and Carl Ganass and artists like this, there's a reason that these are the strongest figure draftsmen in the world, in my opinion. And I think the reason is that you have specialized. You have so much time in front of the model. You have to stay ahead of your students, and your students are elite. These are future Disney animators and future, you know what I mean, designers and people in advertising and future fine artists. And so I think that that is a bit, at least in our current society, teaching drawing is a fantastic way to become masterful at drawing. Do you agree with that?
Also, what we're teaching is people tend to say, oh, well, you can draw, you just do that. I have had numerous doctors in class.
Yeah.
And I've got two examples of guys. One is an internal medicine guy at UCLA right now. He says, drawing is so much more difficult. It's so much more difficult than taking and doing a heart transplant.
No comment. No comment. I can't imagine anything more difficult than drawing. It's a
whole unique thing that we do.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of a cliche is you're spreading your soul thinly upon a piece of paper. And the new paper now is thinly stone paper.
Oh my God. All right. We should have organized some kind of coordination. Well, I do have a question for you, because this actually comes up a lot when it comes to anatomy. And this is personal, but for me, as I've been studying anatomy for 15 years, as you know. And when it comes to books, anatomy books for artists, my recommendations have narrowed more and more over the years, where nowadays it's Albinus on Art, which is a Dover one, and it's Paul Richet's anatomy book. I'll tell students to look at Leonardo and Vesalius as well. But I am curious, like, what do you think about books like Bomis's Anatomy, or books like more contemporary ones like that deal with anatomy, like Bridgman or Bomis or Hogarth? Like, what's your opinion on those approaches?
Okay. Bridgman was probably the only one that was around when I was a student. Okay. So Bridgman, but one of my instructors actually studied with Bridgman.
Well, Lorser studied with him, right?
Lorser.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but he didn't think very much of it.
Really?
He thought he didn't get much from Bridgman. Anyway, so I found that the anatomy books that show a lot of different sort of a technique, style, I tried to stay away from. In other words, I'm not interested in this guy's how to draw. I want to look at what the anatomy is.
Is that because the drawing is not that strong? Like, this is not Michelangelo. There's no finished work. This is just somebody who's doing it. So is that why?
The anatomy books that, well, started out with, Bridgman and Peck, because they were pretty straightforward type of things. But from that point on, I started to actually going into regular medical texts.
Yeah.
And Netter. Yeah. And today there's so much material for the students. But the ones that you were mentioning, I don't care for, I can't even think of his name now.
Bomis or Godfrey Bomis?
No, those two. but I'm the
Loomis?
guy the balloon figures.
Oh, Hogarth.
Yeah,
Well, was Hogarth? Well, Hogarth was a
really
colleague of
dislike
yours, right?
Hogarth.
Hogarth
Huh?
was at Hogarth was at Art Center. He was Ray
That was
Bustos'
that was
teacher,
after
right?
I left.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I
years
see.
later. I didn't physically never met him.
Okay.
But I
Maybe.
don't. I really do not like those books
Yeah,
because
most of the
it's phony
most of them are
anatomy.
20th century. There were so many 20th century books for artists. That's like this explosion of content, but it's mostly done by illustrators. You know what I
That's
mean? So
exactly, yeah.
I think that
And
I
that,
think that that maybe is a problem because the illustrators, their working methods have to do with using photos, sometimes tracing photos. Often, even Norman Rockwell was tracing; he was using projectors and
well,
stuff.
the trouble with the illustration is that it's like Loomis follows into that sort of category. The information is pretty good, but if you focused everything on that, you will find that everything you do starts turning out like a 1930s illustration.
Yeah,
And you have to be careful. Go to the real thing.
yeah,
I'm always saying, I'm not interested in that formula. Draw the skull.
yeah,
Draw the real thing.
yeah.
And then you can go from there to anything you want. But start with the real thing. Okay, to
Yeah.
do that, though, you have to be able to describe form.
Yeah, are you aware of like the constructive anatomy courses at Art Center? I was invited to teach this. Bill invited me to teach this course, but it was right before we moved. But I was looking into the curriculum. I think there's a lot of artists that teach it, but basically it's like a sort of like a architectural, structural, kind of color coded, sort of like a visual, like a viz dev style of drawing. What do you've seen these? I'm sure you've seen these kinds of diagrams and stuff. What do you think
Yeah.
of that approach to anatomy?
No, it's the. I've been in many classes where I have students who have had all kinds of anatomy classes, and it doesn't look like they've ever been in one.
Yeah.
Because they know the names, they know this, they've copied, they traced, they've done all that, but it still comes down to draw.
Yeah.
You have to be able to describe the form.
Yeah.
And if you can't describe the form,
Yeah.
the only way you can describe the form is by knowing the form. And so you have to take and study the anatomy wherever you source. Whether I've drawn from cadavers, I've drawn from, like I say, I've gone basically down to the really medical texts.
Yeah, that's what I tell students too, is that if you don't understand gesture and you can't describe form, you can't understand the anatomy. So in order to even see the anatomy, you have to have a certain level of sophistication with form, which maybe you develop with still lives. I mean, I did pillows and blankets and things like this, and you had me do these kinds of exercises, but it wasn't until I could draw, an inert fold and I could really get it to work the surface that my anatomy studies were actually productive, because I think the drawing limitations. So if you have to turn it into a box or a cylinder or something abstract in order to draw it, if you can't just draw the real naturalistic forms, I feel like you can't learn them. And so I don't think artists should study anatomy too early. I don't know what your feeling is on this, because first they just really need to learn how to draw first, I feel.
And the point, though, is you never stop learning it.
Yeah, it's true.
You never, ever stop learning it or studying it. And it's a constant thing. Like, okay, I do most of my own stuff from imagination.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm always running into some kind of a weird angle that I decided to draw. And then I'm taking and saying, all right,
Yeah.
now let's really dig into this. How does this work?
Yeah.
And so it's a constant. You take and you start out with your great ideas, and you ideal yourself into a corner. You've got to work like hell to get yourself out of that corner. And people say, I have questions all the time where, what if something's wrong? What do you do?
Yeah.
Well, you correct it, you change it, you do it over.
Yeah.
until you get it right or you've figured it out. And maybe once you've figured it out, you might say, I don't really like that pose either.
Yeah. That's true. Maybe the pose doesn't work. You know what I mean? And you have to come up with a new pose. Yeah. Let me ask you another question, Glenn. This is from Dylan Dixon. What are your favorite tools to use when sketching on location currently? Like sketchbook,
that has just changed. Now it's the stone sketchbook. I'm going to ask everybody that's going to be traveling with me this coming summer, going with the new masters thing, going to Florence, or where they can be in Vienna or Germany. I'm going to send them and say, hey, you need to have this sketchbook because you can use any media you want.
Yeah.
I just ordered them. I've got 3 of them. Yeah. I've got a big A4, 5, and a 6. And I carry them around in my pocket now.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. You can push watercolor around on it. There's no wrinkling. It's absolutely. I know. I should be getting.
Well, how about this? Let's bring it full circle to something useful. NMA family, anyone who's listening to this, email Karst and tell them we need sketchbooks that are bigger than A4. We need them immediately. That would be really cool because that's the only downside.
Yeah. At least double.
Yeah. What about drawing utensils, Glenn? What are you drawing with usually?
Okay, well, the same thing. On this paper, you can use pretty much anything. So I'm using a. Let's see if I got a holder here. What's in my pocket?
I've never talked to Glenn so long without him drawing. This is starting to get weird.
What I'm using though, this is pretty cool because I starting out a lot with it. This is water soluble Caran d'Ache.
Clutch.
It's a crayon.
Clutch, bro.
Water. It's a watercolor actually.
Oh, it's water soluble. Oh, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. It's watercolor.
Yeah.
And the drawing I was just showing you, that's what I used. And so then I'm also, which is sort of extra type thing, the same paper I'm using silver point on.
Yes. Now, that's something I actually love these sketchbooks. We were both using them and we hadn't talked about it, but Glenn was saying you can use it as silver point paper because normally you have to make a ground and then you have to treat the paper and then it can work as silver point. Yeah.
But this works, I guess. Paper. Yeah. And so, but I also found out I accidentally picked up a holder. Yeah. Because I just stuck the lead inside of a regular pencil holder.
Yeah. Me too. I used the roach rings.
I picked up the wrong holder, and it was just drawing with the aluminum edge of the.
Okay.
That worked just as well.
That's wonderful.
Except that I didn't have a point on it.
Yeah. Hey, if anyone here is from Karst and you're hearing this, please get in touch with us.
Yeah, so you can. On this paper, a little bit of water for sketching. That's the paper. Then I use water-soluble graphite pencils. Okay, and a couple of different colors.
Yeah.
And so then that's so basically everything I can carry in my pocket. This is another thing. This is had it in my pocket.
Yeah.
Is a Conor lead, but it's the same as the natural stone.
Yeah.
And the drawing. So I use that on the paper. It's beautiful. And sanguine. I use the sanguine colors pretty much. Everything's homogeneous. Then I'm using a fountain pen.
I want to say that though, because I've noticed over the years that we've had a relationship and even retroactively that the materials that you are currently using tend to become popular in the art community. I think you popularized fountain pen. I think you popularized the water brush. You popularized using an Altoid container for your watercolors. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Glenn starts using it. People see it. A lot of professionals, a lot of people in entertainment and art directors and anime, a lot of people see it. They're like, oh, cool, I want to do it like Glenn. They do it. Somebody that sees them do that then makes a video on YouTube, and then everyone's using it. But I even tell me if this is right or wrong, Glenn. Tell me if this is right or wrong. I don't want to overstate this, but I believe right now boxes using solids for constructing the figure, that's very, very popular. the Vilppu manual is chapter 2, spheroids, chapter 3, and obviously Bridgman is using constructive stuff. But in terms of the way you use the boxes to contain the parts of the body, you know, going back to Luca Cambiaso and Albrecht Dürer and people like this, I actually think you popularized in our time using construction like the box and cylinders and spheres for drawing the figure, compared to when you were a student at Art Center. It was more of a direct illustration, croquis, or an academic in some pockets, in academic envelopes. Was anybody else doing construction the way you were? Or do you think it is possible that it's your teaching 70,000, 100,000 students, and then now tens of millions of students because of the internet and everything we've been doing in the last 10 years?
When I started teaching, okay, they didn't teach you how to teach.
Or how to.
And so when I got hired to teach, I had just quit the school 6 months before because I wasn't learning fast enough. Yeah. So they hired me back, even though I hadn't gotten my degree or anything. They hired me back to start teaching, and
Interesting.
it was for a basic drawing class. And at that point, I didn't. What do you do? I don't know. And my teacher would say, "Well, you were in class. Teach." Okay. I went around to everybody, all my teachers, and I said, "What do I do?" And one gal, Mary Vartikian, which I really liked. A lot of my friends couldn't stand her, but I really thought she was great. Anyway, and she said, you know, the first day of her, she started teaching. She talked for 8 hours straight. And then it dawned on her, what is she going to do the next week?
Yeah.
Okay. So then what I did is, and this is literally the way the drawing manual actually has evolved from. I started, okay, what's number 1? Then what's number 2?
Why were gestural lines number 1, and then why were the next steps solid forms the way maybe Bridgman and Hale might talk about?
Okay. Well, you're a sculptor. The sculptor, when you start to bend some wires for some sculpture, what's it based on? The action of the figure. If you don't know the action of the figure, you can't even bend the wires to do what you want. To even bend those wires, you have to have a concept and a feeling for the action that you're trying to do. That literally is your subject. If you don't have a gesture, you literally don't have anything. Well, yes, you can now. Now, I shouldn't say that, because you can look at something from any point of view you want to look at it from.
Yeah.
You can focus on shapes, you can focus on color. Texture.
A lot of people are starting with a box and then they're sort of drawing a mannequin into that. Do you think it's a good idea to go right to the mannequin, or do you need that gestural stage to begin the drawing?
How can you put a box if you don't know what it's going to do? What's number 1?
Yeah.
You start to put a box down, it's got to be doing something. It has to be in a direction. It has to be in an attitude.
So you can't design the figure if you're dealing with abstract things that contain the figure as your first step. You need to, it's more about where the actual figure's going on the page and those shapes and those positions and those movements of those wires. And if you start with a big box, it's a inorganic, unartistic way to do it, right?
Okay. Now, first of all, everything in the Renaissance started from the need to take and communicate an idea. So the idea was based on using figures as illustration. So they were taking and creating an experience. So the first step is creating an organization of shapes and lines that creates a specific feeling and fits within the context of a composition. That's number 1. And so we call it a gesture, line of action. All those two are two different things. But that's the beginning. So I tell people, everything I learned and do comes from studying the old masters. My drawing, my gesture drawing, it's my interest in a specific area or different artists like Parmigianino, it's a kind of rhythmical lines, but we see it in El Greco, we see it in Raphael, And everybody that's there. But that's a compositional concept. You're organizing the lines to take and communicate an action or a feeling.
So can I summarize this by saying that the problem of creating a spatial trompe-l'oeil 3D illusion, that is an important problem, but it's not the primary concern. The primary concern is composition and the linear design and the actual where the lines are going on the page. That comes before. It's more important than just the spatial illusion. Do you agree with that?
Amen. Well, okay. Now you're talking about art.
Yeah.
It's the expression.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're not interested in art and you're just duplicating, then it's a purely mechanical thing.
Yeah.
Taking and
it's almost like they want to think about art like a video game engine or something, where it's like, okay, here's my environment, here's my crosshairs, then here's my elements, and they want to like. It seems to me very much like they want that simplicity that, okay, it's spatial, and so that requires a lot of skill. But essentially, I feel like they want it to be easy. And what they should be doing is thinking of the design of it. They should be trying to think of, how do I make a beautiful picture, a beautiful arrangement of lines, rather than how do I sort of pose my little action figures and my little cars and my little toys in my little play set in order to create my scene. So I see a lot of influence of 3D software, video game pipelines, CG film pipelines, and also kids growing up with Minecraft. I can kind of see why they might want to make it because it's actually simplifying the problem. But I think, like you said, you're not really, that's only part of it, right? To think it like an artist, it's really about that subject matter and how it's being depicted and that feeling of movement and that performance. And that's the stuff that is the most important to bring it to life. So that's where we should start. We shouldn't start with the mannequin, and we shouldn't start with the box when it comes to the figure, although it's useful. We need to start with the design of the figure. And that is best expressed with curved lines that are very intentionally placed.
Well, it's the kind of lines that you put that's going to do the expressive, because they can be jagged lines, they can be broken lines. It's the expression that you want to communicate.
Strong.
And it's visual thinking.
Yeah.
We think visually, and which I was just this morning I was thinking about. There's so much stuff today now, or even I have a Tesla. It's all based on visual navigation.
Yeah.
Everything, all of the stuff they're talking about, you can go on Google now and you can search for something by the visual thing. And so it's vision, it's seeing. And so if you want to take and create and communicate, you've got to know how to take and manipulate things.
That's interesting.
Space and relationships.
Yeah, because it's the idea that drawing is like a Alberti's window into a 3D space. That idea seems to have, I think we won the war on that idea as a community. Like, we understand that if it's going to be illusionary, it needs to be 3D, but people are no longer studying the line, the linear stuff, the flow and the composition, and they're sort of jumping right into that.
Yeah.
So mannequins are not the solution. It's just a tool, but it needs to fall behind design and gesture and all the compositional considerations.
Yeah, it's a step by step. One of the things I try to tell people is that, first of all, the way we're talking, it sounds incredibly complex. Okay, but in reality, the mechanics are very simple.
Yeah.
You can take a pipe cleaner and bend it to get an action. You can styrofoam balls, you can stick them and make the action.
Yeah.
You can take and create the form.
Yeah.
The mechanics are simple. You learn anatomy, then you got to start knowing more.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's not the art. The expression and stuff, that comes, first of all, you have to learn the notes on the piano.
Yeah.
Okay. before you start making music out of it.
Yeah, and people want to jump into perspective right away. There's been a lot of influential in the last decades. You got Scott Robertson. You have a Drawbox who we're partnered with. It's a fantastic free resource. You should check it out. Dynamic sketching, industrial design, sort of taking over more and more of the entertainment aesthetics. So there's a lot of that's really it's more like a hard. People I think they like clear answers. It's a box, and then we're going to put this thing, we're going to plot this thing inside this. And I feel like when it comes to being expressive, or when it comes to performing, I feel like that's a little bit, I think that creates uncertainty in the mind of the student, and they don't like it sometimes. And then they just want it to be like, give me an easy answer. Give me a very specific beam. Give me a very specific breakdown of the head. Give me something that is like, I can just learn this one thing to apply. And so I understand the appeal of that. But I do want to jump on though, because I know I've got more questions here. Glenn, how does somebody, this is a question by Varun, how does somebody break away from relying on reference like a crutch and use it to fuel creativity? How can you practice being creative in the first place?
Okay, first of all, you have to have some beginning. I'm always saying we don't copy. We are not copying. We're not copying. Okay.
Uses everybody.
But in reality, the camera is a great tool. The reference material is there. It's useful. You use it. It doesn't use you. Okay. If you use the reference material, but you're not a slave to the reference material. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with using reference. You have to. Well, I get away from not using a lot of it because, my own work, people are surprised to find out, but I can be quite abstract. Okay.
Your background too. You have abstract modern stuff. I've seen it.
Yeah. So that the idea is of using reference. You don't try to never use it. Well, drawing from imagination lets you know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a specialty. That's a specialty of yours, Glenn. Drawing from imagination. Was that common amongst other teachers at Art Center or Cal Arts, or was that sort of something?
No, that's a byproduct. That's a byproduct of creating pictures. Okay. In other words, you start out with a composition. Okay, the composition is based on just a sense of movement or some arrangement that you want. So I start out with a composition. That's number one. Okay, sometimes you see a full pose or something. I say, oh, that's really a cool pose. I wonder how can I use that? Then you start to change it, but to work with the composition. But it starts with the composition, and then as you start working, then you have to end up drawing most of the time from imagination as you're painting or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, there are a lot of approaches where they're staging a model really carefully, and then they're photographing it, then they're preparing the photograph, and then they're drawing from that. And so the composition, insofar as what they're doing, has to do more with the arrangement of the scene. Do you believe that's a good way to work, or do you think composition it's a sketch, it's a drawing basically that you're just coming up with? You don't have to look at anything.
That's again, traditionally it started out with an idea. They do the sketch, they think, and the final thing is, as needed, they will get a model.
Yeah.
And I got a kick out of one of the things that Titian, and it also goes with Tintoretto, talk about the fact that, first of all, the apprentices were used for female models. Okay. And so that they very rare, they were very prudish actually. They did not use female nudes. So, but when they did, they had to say hire a prostitute or something, and they were so expensive that they could rarely do that.
Oh, really?
They're too expensive to hire a bunch of prostitutes to pose for you.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they're talking about the female nude. So they would, but the actual model that they would take and work from, that's the end product. at
Yeah.
the end thing.
Yeah, people seem to misunderstand that.
Yeah, all of the clothed figures were drawn nude first,
Yeah.
from imagination to start with. Then they would take and develop it from that. So
Yeah.
one of the things in Florence, I'm gonna take the group with me. We're gonna go to a Last Supper type thing by Andrea del Sarto. And what's neat is that they have a cabinet on the side. It's in a dining hall, which is appropriate.
Glenn, are there still spots? Because just for anyone who doesn't know, New Masters Academy, we rented a castle outside of Florence and for a workshop. And it's a workshop I'm going to be teaching my version of traditional drawing. We're going to be going to the museums. Glenn Vilppu is going to be there. Eleanor's going to be there. Bill Perkins and his wife are going to be there. Catherine and her partner are going to be there. Miles Yoshida is coming. Ben Fensky is going to be there. It's going to be awesome. But that one sold out immediately, pretty much. That sold out within 3 hours of announcing. Glenn is after that workshop. Glenn is going to be doing a sketching workshop in Florence.
Which is also sold out.
Oh, it's sold out. Well, maybe we
should. That's all totally full.
I do have to say we do have an anatomy workshop. We've been talking about anatomy, but there's an anatomy workshop coming up in November. It's going to be in Santa Fe, New Mexico, just 3 hours from where I live. It's a huge venue. It's much bigger than the Castle venue. But if you are looking to learn anatomy, I believe the best way to do that is with drawing and 3D in combination, because teaching myself anatomy, the drawings are super helpful, but really building it in 3D, that gives you sort of the tactile not stereometric, but it gives you an additional way to learn
I'm going to be there helping on that. So
yes,
I'm planning to. I'm actually sort of looking for. This was going to be fun.
Oh yeah.
Because when I work with students, I draw. So that's what I do. Okay. So as they're doing their sculpture, I may correct or something or give comments, but I will do it by drawing the sculpture.
That's so cool. And Glenn's the only, so it's Glenn Vilppu, it's Johanna Schweiger, it's Ray Bustos, who, in my opinion, in terms of people who specialize in teaching anatomy, he's the best. And it's all of us going to be teaching. And so you're going to be making an écorché model, I think a 24-inch model. We have references for you. You're basically going to be making something like this Houdon écorché that you see behind me. We're going to be building that, but you don't need to have any sculpture experience. If you have some basic drawing experience is ideal, but come and study with me, come and study with Glenn and Johanna and Ray Bustos. It's going to be a blast. And hopefully we can see you guys there. And there are spots. Like I say, it's a large venue. So let us know if you're interested in that. Definitely check it out. We'd love to get a chance to meet you.
I'm actually looking forward to. We're going to drive there, and then we're driving back. We're going somewhere else right after, and it's looking. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
First of all, it's another opportunity for me because during the pandemic and all that, I'm really short on being able to actually draw from models.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to be able to take and work with people making their sculptures and doing that. And they're a model. I draw.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's going to be fun.
Let me move on because I want to get through more of these questions. So Kush asked Glenn, if you could meet any artist from the past, who would you meet and what would be the one question that you ask them?
What? One question?
You get one question and one artist from the past.
What'd you have for breakfast?
You heard it, folks.
I'm drawn from these guys so much.
Yeah.
And I find that my question probably would come down to what was the one consistent thing you studied? What did you learn? Or not? What's your motivation? Because that's sort of like studying. You studying somebody. So it's like one question. You look at Michelangelo. He was actually a very religious guy.
Yeah.
Okay. But he was inspired by a lot of the Greek things and the power of the individual. And the humanist whole Renaissance and rebirth of the individual.
Yeah, and just rebirth of the Greeks. That's the one thing that
Well, that
always
the
goes back
whole
to the
idea.
Greeks. Yeah,
The whole idea is the icons before in the medieval times were symbols, but with Giotto, we get a real figure that they're talking about. It's talking about the individual and man and the human experience. Art is the expression of man or women, okay? But it's the individual's expression. And that's where I think Joshua Newmasters and myself, it's been a focus on people being able to develop their skills to do their art, not our art. I'm a teacher. I want you to do your work. And people say, "Oh, I want to draw like Vilppu." No way.
Well, some of your most successful
the same
students
experience that I have to do what I do.
Yeah,
You're going to take what I have, and you're going to do it your way.
I think that if you look at Drew Struzan and you look at Richard McDonald and you look at a lot of your students who are some of the most successful artists in the world, those are two of the most successful artists in the world at their profession. It's interesting because Richard his stuff doesn't look like you, and Drew Struzan's work, obviously the Harry Potter and the Star Wars and the Indiana Jones posters, all these famous, but they don't look like Vilppu either. But at the same time, you like on the back of the book jacket for your book, Drew Struzan says, I don't remember if this is the final quote, but because I remember reading it, but basically he was saying that you taught him how to draw and communicate emotion and feeling, but it doesn't have to look like your drawings. And I think that's an ideal that we should strive for, is helping them develop their own voice, but just having better tools and also having an inspirational, like the master is an inspiration. So from you, I'm learning, how long do I draw before I take a break? That's longer than I thought. How much time do I draw in a day? Like, damn, Glenn will draw 10 hours a day sometimes. And obviously these other teachers too, like, Gary Meyer, for example, I learned that you also just learn to imitate things about the teacher that you would never think to ask. And that's something that you get, so much of it is monkey see, monkey do. It's imitation. I'm like, oh, okay, I got my coffee and I'm sitting at my thing. I'm just imitating my teacher. And I think that's something that's very hard to communicate online. And that's something that if your teacher's not a master, if they make YouTube videos or they make content, you can't pick up those nuances from them because they don't actually have it. So that's why you want to have a master as your instructor. And if possible, you want to get as intimate a connection as possible, because there's so many things about how the pencil is held and how the body moves and all of these subtle things that it's impossible to know those questions to ask. You have to just be immersed in the behavioral modeling,
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Gary Meyer and I were students together.
Oh, really? Oh, Gary is a huge inspiration for me. I love Gary so much. I'm so sorry that he passed. Maybe we should take a moment to talk about some of the important artists and new masters who we've lost. Obviously another mentor of mine, Mark Westermo, passed away. That was very sad. I was with him.
Mark was also a student of mine to start with.
He was a student of you. Oh, okay. Do you want to should we get into some spice here? Because I heard that Mark's teacher, Fred Fixler, and Glenn Vilppu were sort of having diverging. You guys had like some camps. And so you had like
it was sort of
Jeff Watts and these guys on this side. And then you had the Carmine and the Fidelson and those guys on that side. Was that really a thing?
I had in school, we had like 5 different classes a week, each all day long. Yeah. And most of the time, the instructors never agreed with each other. They didn't necessarily even like each other. And so you had to make up your own mind.
Yeah.
And you went and, I had the same lectures, listened to the same class, been in the same classes as everybody else. Yeah. I went my way. Gary went his way. Yeah. Everybody goes off on their own. We heard the same words, but we understood something different.
Yeah.
and our personalities were focused in a different direction. Anyway, but
that's the spice, though. That's what makes it so interesting. If everybody went to the same atelier and we all did drawings that look identical, it's not going to be as exciting, you know.
Yeah, no rules.
Yeah. So Glenn, how have you maintained your health over time while drawing? You've been drawing a very long time. Have you dealt with wrist issues, carpal tunnel, like so many students? I hear it all the time.
First of all,
That's David.
Very strict in my diet. I exercise. It's like right now, I'm not sitting. I have my computer is up high. I'm trying to go for walks. But I'm very strict. I don't smoke. I haven't had a drink in 35 years.
Yeah.
I'm active. It's keeping your brain moving.
They're not going to like this. They're not going to like this. You're basically touch grass, exercise, get sleep, you know, the healthy things. You need to be healthy to be a healthy artist.
Right. You eat well, sleep well. You have to sleep.
Yeah.
You eat well, sleep well, exercise. I have a lovely wife who keeps me on track.
She cracks that whip just like Indiana Jones, illustrated by Drew Struz and Vilppu student.
Well, also, you can probably get the idea.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Yeah.
I really enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I know Joshua does.
Yeah.
And you have to, if you don't like what you're doing, why are you doing it?
Yeah, I think students are rushing to get to a goal. Like they're like, oh, I want to make my graphic novel or whatever. They're trying to get to that goal. And then they're kind of like, well, what do I need to do? Do I really need to do this? The Vilppu method, is this really good for comics? Like they're constantly like, they want to minimize the time before they're a master. But one thing that I tell students, maybe you can tell me what you think about this, is I tell them that the version of you who is a master is not you as you are now. The mastery doesn't come to you and it's like a superpower. You change to become more masterful and you're cultivating your craft. So the idea that you're going to plug into the matrix and it's just going to upload mastery into your brain and now look at me, I can do this stuff. It's more like you're changing yourself in your everyday routine, in your habits, in your way of thinking, and you just keep refining yourself like you're sharpening a blade. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, it's like, I'm so well known in the animation industry. And people forget that I was 40 before I ever got involved in animation. It's just because that they paid you to draw. That's why I went there.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to check every week, you know. But the idea is that the skills that you have, they will take you in directions of your own interest. You know, as a student, I did comics with somebody. Okay, I learned a lot at that point. I learned how to draw pretty damn fast.
Yeah.
Okay, but that was useful for 20 years later when I started working in animation. But the fact that my skill set is not cartooning, I wasn't even interested in animation.
Why is it? Tell me this. I heard this about you before I met you from several sources. People would say, Glenn taught the animators how to draw. Can you help me interpret what that actually means? That was your reputation.
Yeah, well, basically, I had a lot before I started at Disney. I had many of my students were going there and getting jobs. And it was mainly because the skills of being able to take and go through the drawing process in a very systematic way to achieve something. It was being very organized. And that is probably my biggest gift, has been in the organization of the process. That are going step 1, 2, 3, all of that.
Yeah.
That is actually fairly unique.
When you were in animation, Glenn, were you learning from them as much as you were teaching, or do you feel like it was more like you were giving them more of a traditional fine art understanding to improve the animation,
Well,
or was it both happening both ways?
it was sort of funny. I stepped right into the animation thing. It was like, oh, all they're asking me to do is compose pictures from my imagination. And you got these funny little figures. Well, those spherical forms, well, Rubens did that. And so it was just learning the kind of adaptation of everything I already was doing.
I see.
And that's like going from step one to step two. Hey, that's a no-brainer. And you start going from there. And I also had done a lot of landscape painting when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still doing landscape painting, teaching it. Okay. But the idea of then doing layouts and designing, well, just composing. I taught. So when I started working there, I was also teaching there. And it's the construction approach that I have, that I use, which is just very, very traditional.
So this is the Disney, I mean, I know some of your colleagues, Glenn Keane, Michael Cedino, Kathleen Quaife, all these unbelievable, the late Kathleen Quaife.
Yeah, it's the Disney school, like CalArts, was Chenard's. Okay. And Disney bought Chenard's to create CalArts, except they immediately fired everybody. And
don't piss off the mouse. We're alive here.
Yeah. So
I don't need
anyway,
that
but the idea of the construction, Walt Stanfield, who was basically from Chenard's.
You're in that book. You're in Drawn to Life, right?
Yeah. And so in his book, he used some of my construction type drawings, because that's actually what you do in animation. As you have model sheets that show you the construction of the characters.
Just like Leonardo had model sheets, just like Durer had model sheets.
Yeah, exactly. It's no different, really. Yeah. It's all the process is pretty darn much the same. Yeah. Except it's communal. Yeah. It's many people doing it, and even in the individual art pieces, you have to take and put your ego aside and learn to work as a group. And so but the discipline of the construction, understanding the form, capturing the gesture, that's what I did before. And so I just moved right in. And I was teaching that, and I had my students. I was known at Disney before they hired me because of my students.
And so do you think, do you think that contributed to the more solid look of the Disney Renaissance period, where obviously new Masters Academy instructors were working on, the art directors on a lot of these projects, Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast. One thing you notice about that is there's this return of like really good draftsmanship and really solid forms. And they kind of had the vibe of some of the classic Golden Age Disney in terms of the, do you feel like you were part of that movement and part of that change?
Clearly, the idea of, I had one of my students got hired, one of many. Okay, we got hired, and I've told his story many times, and he drew very well, and he became an assistant to one of the top guys. And he asked him, well, do you have any advice? And the guy said 2 things. 1, construct. 2, no weird drawings.
No weird drawings. So what do you think he meant by that?
Well, because at that point, a lot of people at CalArts would come in with this being really dynamic, and then doing all this really sort of strange type, creative, visionary quote works, but it didn't apply. He was taking and doing of course, he was Disney. He was doing very solid stuff. So he was working as an assistant for this guy. He had to construct, and he had to do everything, but it has to be right on the money. And that okay, that involves understanding and knowledge,
Yeah.
and how you apply that knowledge. And so the construction type thing was just a natural thing. And so if anybody looks at the Walt Stanfield things, you'll see it goes into all this. And Disney had a school of animation, or they called the Disney University. It was only for people on staff.
Yeah.
I taught the drawing class. Eric Larson did character design, or not design, but character analysis, I believe. I think Walt and not Walt, but
Walt's more on the illustration side, right?
all the guys, but everybody, all the people, the staff was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
But then everybody in the studio would take these classes, and so that was a big major element of my approach into teaching, was to going from that gesture thing to a solid kind of construction in the studio.
Yeah.
That's what I taught.
Yeah, and that's something that's something Disney started early on, right? And Before Ever After.
Yeah, and they
book about
that, absolutely, and because the same basic things, and so it wasn't nothing new.
Yeah.
It really goes back. You look at the Carroccio, you look at the Michelangelos, you look at how they developed and constructed the stuff.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing. It's not new. And that,
Yeah.
I have been showing recently drawings on frescoes from the tomb of Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, 400 BC. And you look at those frescoes.
Yeah.
They're very modern, very straightforward, simple, straight kind of.
We haven't added that much to the tradition. Like a lot of things that we think of as contemporary. I've had conversations where somebody was like, "Oh, somebody said Loomis invented construction." It's like this stuff goes back millennia. You know what I mean? Like all of these concepts. It's just how we're remixing the ingredients a little bit.
Yeah, like even though if you look at those mummy paintings,
the Fayum portraits
on top of the head that were done by basically Greek-trained artists after Apelles, they're very contemporary.
Yeah.
Push the sides back using the cross-hatching.
Yeah, I've actually been. I'm going to share this later, but I've actually been working on. I don't know if this is going to show. I've actually been working on these kinds of analyzing the curves from the sculptures of the antique. And one thing that I've been working on is that these curves that sort of make up the ancient design, you see that the Renaissance artists it's the same curves. Like Michelangelo may have added some extra curves, like on his David, for example. But one thing it seems very clear to me is that for thousands of years, the body has been this like designed object. And even if you look at, Buddhist and Hindu art and Gandharan Buddhist art, which is that transition between Alexander and the Greeks to the East, and that's where the figure art sort of comes to the East. But you see that as like a through line throughout the entire thing, that there are these curves and they get reused. Like, because I know we talk about planes, that's a kind of a popular thing now. What do you think about the pattern of those curves that is used for art history? Do you think that artists are at a disadvantage because we don't really have a good mental template and we're all just sort of observing it?
Well, yeah. The thing, go back when you're talking about the head, go back to the skull. You draw the skull, it's right there. That's what you see. You've got this thing coming across here. You got to feel where the corner is. You can feel where the corners are. You can see that's what happens. And you can look at the past and say, well, yeah, they were taking and designing based on this. But if you're going to take and do things from imagination, do it from knowing the form itself. So
you believe that nature in this respect is the greatest
nature teacher? Absolutely. We look at nature, we use it as an inspiration. People always accuse me when I'm drawing trees that I make them look like figures coming out of the ground. But that's the way I approach it. I look at the organic elements of
that's
it.
how Leonardo and Rubens drew a tree too. They want to bring it to life. They're not trying to just get these shapes of light and dark. That's not the hard part. The organizing the values and the masses, that's the easy part. The hard part is bringing it to life, right?
Okay, Rodin. When he was 40 and he started working on his own stuff, he went to Italy and he went to
do you mean Rubens? You mean Rubens?
No, Rodin.
Rodin. Okay.
And when he went in there, he came back and he says, "It's not about this static stuff. It's all about movement. Movement. It's about life."
Ancient Greeks. That's the ancient Greeks. That's Hellenism. That's classical. That's the Pergamon altar.
Yeah. And that's, you create this movement within the thing. And like people ask me about, well, what's your point of interest when doing painting? I said, I don't do that. I said, what do you mean you don't do that?
Yeah.
It's the painting, it's the movement, it's the organization, the experience of the whole that counts, not the target. I'm not taking and drawing or painting a bowl of fruit. I'm making a picture.
Yeah.
And it's how you arrange all these things.
That's interesting, Glenn, because I would say that most teachers, most artists, they think that there should be a first read, a second read, etc. That's very much like from advertising, right? Where you need to get their attention on the product. It needs a billboard, magazine cover, whatever. You only have their attention for a moment and you want them to look right, boom, bullseye there. But that's not really traditional, right? It's more about the movement through the composition.
Yeah, it's because the eye. Okay, you don't necessarily start with your eye in the left-hand corner and follow all the way through. That's a tool that creates a certain sense of movement. It's the kind of movement and the play within it. I have right here.
Oh, cool.
One of the paintings. I think it's a great painting, and I don't know if we can see this. This is a very unusual painting for this artist. This is a Caravaggio.
Can you hold it more in the center, Glenn, because it's blurry now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
See, okay. Now, if I can do this in a way that
sure.
Get
I think we get the blurry idea.
Okay. Now, if you look, he divides it right in half.
Yep.
He takes and creates a movement going to the left. All on the left-hand side is all verticals. On the right-hand side, it's all horizontals. Okay. It's taking in, so that's
Space
like
against mass, yeah.
It's taking in. It's like a music. There's slow movement, fast movements.
Yeah.
You're building to a climax.
Yeah.
It's the organization of all of these elements that becomes the play between the parts.
Well, that's also where this idea of proportion and symmetry comes from, supposedly, from what I've read, because a lot of the ancient Greek artists, they were very influenced by, obviously they were inventing geometry and optics and all these things, but like Pythagoras' theorems and theories that influenced very much the ideas that they had. And so they were interested in harmonics, they were interested in ratios, they were interested in commensurability. 8 heads tall, what is that? That's commensurability. And so a lot of these ideas became the central tenets of art, which are still things we use today. People still use these concepts of proportion, and they come from this same idea that was unified with mathematics and music. They all thought it was different elements of the universe. And so are you into any of that, or is that just an interesting historical kind of do you believe that there is something in the mathematics of the universe that keep recurring in all these different art forms?
Plato, the harmony of the spheres, always looking for the ideal. What's the ideal? Whether it's proportions or anything, it's always like there's an ideal.
Do you believe in ideals in the same way for your own art?
Yeah, but the ideal to me is to create a sense of movement of life to the work. How you do that, many, many different ways. I have artists that I look at and I say, gee, this guy is really good. I really like him. And people say, they look at him and they say, well, where are you coming from? You teach classical drawing, and I'm talking about Jules Pfeiffer. He's got a great way of capturing an action and an attitude. It really communicates.
Yeah.
And I show that. I said, well, he's doing the same thing, totally different way.
Yeah.
It doesn't draw like Vilppu, but what he has is a sense of life within his work. And that, to me, that is the most important thing.
Yeah, and that's something that the Greeks and the artists of the Renaissance and a lot of artists throughout history have sort of focused on that idea of naturalism. And so maybe if we're to summarize this, it's like from a Vilppuian perspective, nature is king. We learn from the traditions of the past. Drawing is a two-dimensional linear design activity, but it's also a performance, and it's psychological and it's compositional. And then yes, you need to know your perspective and your forms and your how to deal with light. But it's in a way, I guess that is an idealization, because in your Vilppuian world, everything is just bursting with natural life and vigor. It's got a feeling to it,
Yeah.
That's an ideal.
Yeah, life is not static.
Yeah, frozen snapshot that's a problem with like a photograph. If you try to paint a smile from a photograph, we don't experience these little moments. We're trained to with Instagram and all this stuff, but naturally, like the world is everything is always in movement, in motion. So you talked about the tree, and I think of this as well. Like I draw trees from the roots, and then I pull it up out of the ground. I draw hills as if they're a wave, because I know that if I could speed up time, you would see that it's like a stew. These mountains are crashing and the trees are bursting up. Everything's moving.
Yeah, that's probably one of the things that the idea of movement, that in doing storyboards and stuff, that I had the most fun, because it's all about movement.
Yeah.
And taking how the eye moves. I went through great efforts in trying to control in my layouts and stuff, the storyboards, the directions of the camera to take and create the movement.
That is interesting, because you literally have like a time dimension now. You're not frozen in the drawing. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So Glenn, let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. Do you have advice for artists who are having trouble doing longer work? Because obviously one of your specialties is sketching. Sketching is very popular in entertainment. Fast. It's popular on the internet generally. So how do they get past the sketching into developing work?
Well, the longer pose is dependent on how much you know. Okay, and generally speaking, that start out with 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute poses, 10-minute poses. The standard pose is usually like 25 minutes. Well, in all my years of teaching and stuff, that basically in the regular life drawing class, at 25 minutes has reached the limit of the knowledge of the student.
That's interesting. Like you run out of things to say.
Well, you don't know the forms that you're looking at well enough. Okay, so that as you take and develop your understanding of the form, then you can take and progressively get longer and longer. Now I find that, I really like doing like an hour pose. Because it gives me time to really get fussy about certain elements of the way I design the form, way the feeling like how something's sagging and all the compression and the movement. Okay.
Yeah.
That takes time. So you are doing something longer. You have to have some reason to be doing it longer. other words, you have to have some engagement in the thing. What are you looking at, rather than just copying the thing?
Do you think that artists have to move into longer works in order to fully understand what the sketch is kind of there for? Do you think that if they're just sketching and they're not developing it, maybe they're not really understanding the shorthand?
No, you don't need to go long if you don't. If it fits your expression that you want, fine. There's no reason that you have to. If the drawing that you do takes and communicates and you feel right about it, that's it. There's no point to saying, well, I have to finish it.
Yeah.
It's finished if it accomplishes what you intended.
And that's quite contemporary too, because before Rodin, before all of these modern artists, the sketches were just a working drawing in the workshop. They weren't meant to be posted online or put in a gallery. They were literally just the artist working out this crazy composition they're trying to do. How do you feel about sketch as an art? I know Carl Ganass says this. He says, my sketches are my art.
A lot of times when you go back and you look at them, you can see that people developed a means of taking and using their materials. Okay. And you can start like one of the guys who was a fanatic, Guarcino, he was a fanatic drawer. And he had to develop in working with a pen and a wash. Well, I'd look at that stuff and man, that's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I like that. I like the way that feeling and how you can manipulate things.
Yeah.
Let me grab something here real quick.
Yeah.
Where is it? Oh, I don't know. I had it here a minute ago, but anyway.
So in a way, you're taking a compositional sketching language and you are turning that into a final work.
This is a series of drawings I did yesterday.
Glenn, why don't you bring it towards you? Because you know what I mean? Bring it to your chest, Glenn. I think it'll work better with a blur. Yeah.
Okay, if you can see. Okay. Okay, now this was just taking and having fun. So some of this stuff is done with silver point.
Oh, wow.
And silver point with watercolor going over sanguine pencil here. So starting out with so just playing with I like to be able to. It's like in a candy store, You're taking and pushing things. Oh, this is cool. This is fun.
Yeah.
And trying to, at the same time, the drawing should look nice.
Yeah.
I mean, it should look appealing to you.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of times that a lot of the old masters, they did drawings, but they got carried away a little bit, and they started really enjoying the look and the feel of different materials. And they got created a lot of facility for certain combinations of things that they could use.
Yeah.
And so there was an enjoyment in doing it beyond the practical. But it was still practical at the same time, because they could get a look out of that drawing that then they could translate into the oils or whatever.
Or the stone if they're going to be carving it, like Michelangelo drawing his David and then doing all these studies and then making a model. So it's that iterative process. But I do have a question that I don't know if you want to answer this one or not. It's a little hot. But with the rise of artificial intelligence, I don't want to lead you too much with this question, but how do you feel about the rise of artificial intelligence and how that will impact digital artists? Because a lot of digital artists have been concerned that they are becoming obsolete. I don't know if you're even following this closely. You're probably drawing more than you are.
Yeah, I have.
What do you think?
I tend to be a little bit of a techie.
Yeah.
But I try to keep up on the latest thing that's happening. But the artificial intelligence is, again, you have to feed into, if you're going to make something, you have to feed into it the parameters of what you want. Okay. So that it's not, it doesn't all of a sudden beyond itself. You open a computer and all of a sudden it's making something for you. You have to tell it what you want it to make.
Yeah, real hard.
Yeah, you have to, yeah, you have to take and you have to set goals.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I could see taking and doing a series of thumbnails and stuff and working out what I wanted it to do and then say, hey, let's see what you do.
So you like the idea as more of like a research tool for an artist?
Yeah, it's a tool. That's all. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool, and that's why it's so valuable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are literally wondering if you think the studios are gonna, because I don't know if you know this, but Disney, Marvel, a bunch of studios and big tech companies have been making huge layoffs, like tens of thousands of people, and there's this fear that they are literally going to stop hiring digital artists because they can have one director or one manager using the technology instead.
Yeah. If they find that they can get something that is expressive enough that they want,
Yeah.
and they can make money,
Will they do it?
Well,
That's so funny.
and
basically my same answer.
There's always that reaction. There's the counter reaction to that. Yeah. People are starting actually to get sort of bored with computer animation.
Yeah. So do you think that means that there's maybe going to be a higher premium or more interest on handcrafted stuff because it's more rare?
Yeah. Drawing itself is today is unique. Okay. One of the interesting points that in Southern California, we have this incredible level of draftsmanship, mainly because it was needed. You had to do it for the industry. Okay, I was teaching in Germany a couple of years ago, and I had a really good model, and I was actually in Munich, and I said, "Was anybody else teaching anything like this?" And she says, "Well, no." And I talked to some of the artists, and he says, "Well, there's no need. There's no need for it here. Nobody's studying it because there's no need." Well, that's the fear, I think, that people have with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
That if there's no need for drawing, will there be drawing? But the need is not in that mechanical, it's before that. The need is in the creative process of bringing out of your head something out. Because we can think anything we want to think. There's no rules. But you have to get it out of there down to this stone paper.
That's what makes it interesting. No one cares about your concepts or your perspective, or it's not necessarily interesting unless you can translate it into this beautiful craft. So it's really the human aspect, but that has to be distilled by a craft, this activity, and that's what refines it, right? You literally can't type a prompt. You haven't earned anything. You haven't cultivated yourself. You haven't cultivated your taste. You're not a master. You're someone typing a prompt. That's never going to be as fascinating maybe to others as somebody who can do this thing. It's human. It's cultural, right?
Yeah. If you can't get it out of your head, you can't. What is it? You're just sort of might as well go live off in the woods and just think.
That doesn't sound like a bad life. So Glenn, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I have to make an announcement, and then we have to wrap up because we're going to have another stream starting soon. So let me sorry everybody, I know we got a ton of questions.
We can go on until 3:00 or so.
Well, we have a stream. We've got a stream.
No, I know. I was just going.
But so I'm going to try to pick one. I'm going to read, and I'll just try to pick one that seems juicy. Glenn, how has your work evolved over time, specifically? Like your style, your approach?
It's ironic is that I am now taking and going back to ideas and things I did 50 years ago.
Interesting.
Some of the basic concepts I'm still using. Okay, my skill is I draw much better now than I did 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago.
Yeah. 2 years ago.
I'm drawing much, much better.
Yeah.
Okay. But in terms of the aesthetics and the things that I'm trying to create on my own, I'm actually taking and going back to ideas that I had 60 years ago. And I'm using them. They're different.
Yeah.
I'm actually doing some fairly large pastels, composing. The idea, they're quite abstract movement. But it's the idea is the things that are pretty consistent, except for the skill level. The materials, a whole new, which has been talking about paper, a whole new materials that we use. But this is interesting because I'm using like a water brush. You can see a fountain pen, stone paper. I'm using all of these watercolor crayon, all of these tools, but the drawing, I'm using them to create the same kind of things. If I'm absolutely sure that if Guarcino had a fountain pen like an Amica, he would have used it.
Sure.
A water brush, he would have used it.
Yeah.
It's these implements, and the students tend to be so conservative. They need to take and experience these tools.
Yeah, they want to use the Conte because this school teaches the Conte. They want to use pen only because dynamic sketching, like they're very fixated, I think, when they're starting out, which makes sense. They're very fixated on the tools, and it's less of this just boldness of the creative who will take anything. And that's why Sheldon does his Milky Way demo with the chocolate bar, because the whole point is that it's not about the
great.
So, Glenn, this reminds me so much of our time together. I would love to just hang out all day. I do have to make an announcement, and then we're going to have to wrap up this stream.
For a minute. We'll hang out in Florence and New Mexico.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to make people feel bad because they can't come because it's sold out. But if you want to study with Glenn and I and Ray Bustos and Johanna, check out our Santa Fe workshop. That's destination.nma.art, destination singular. Check out the Vilppu Academy book. We still have some left. We're almost at the end of this first printing. So we're going to be very soon needing to print more, do another edition, maybe do a soft cover or something else. But for right now, there's only, I think there's maybe 150 books left. That's it. So when those are gone, those are gone. Check it out. Vilppu Drawing Manual. It was, Drew Struzan is on the cover endorsing it. Stan Prokopenko talks about how Glenn was his primary source for developing his online teaching program, which is very interesting because he went to Watts Atelier and they've got a very specific method. And to say that Glenn's book was actually the most influential on him, I think that says something about it, even within, the younger generation of artists who are out there teaching. Glenn's just, I think this is, sure, Betty Edwards, that's what the AI was talking about, or I think Glenn is, I agree with the AI. Top 3 influential draftsmen of our entire time. You have to get his book. I think it's by far the best book on figure. The Vilppu Drawing Manual. Check that out. Check out Vilppu Academy. This is what we were talking about earlier. This is a way that you can. It's won awards. It's very highly renowned. It's actually older than New Masters because we did it before New Masters. And this is it's not like New Masters where it's a subscription. You're actually taking classes. You're getting lots of FaceTime with Glenn. And so this is everyone complains, the Master Apprentice system, we can't do it anymore. Well, you could take a Vilppu Academy course and you could work with Glenn. And I think that is, if that's something you can afford, if that's something you could do, check it out. Keep an eye on Glenn's website because Glenn is now venturing back out into the world. Hopefully there's going to be more workshops, more things. Get on their mailing list.
Yeah, Vilppu Academy's new classes start next Monday.
There you go. Vilppu Academy. Check that out. Obviously, Glenn's also doing a Friday. He does a Friday a drawing stream for New Masters Academy. Maybe we can enlist him to do more for New Masters, like group coaching or something. We'll see. But thank you so much, Glenn, for being here. And so I'm running out of time, so I do have to jump to this next part.
It's been a great journey. It's just the beginning.
Speaking of that,
thank you.
Speaking of that, it's been 10 years. I mean, New Masters was incorporated in 2012. We started working on some of the elements in 2011, but it's been 10 years since, New Masters Academy has been out there, out of beta in the world. We had a long beta program. The first website we started with, that was the original, that's NMA 1.0. In 2018, we launched New Masters Academy version 2.0, which was a massive improvement. It took us years to develop it. It was a big deal. It was a renewed, invigorating experience. It had a lot of innovative features that, New Masters has continued to innovate in this space, using 3D models to teach from and teach anatomy, for example, or to use 3D models of scans. We were the first to do that, giving an entire library of tens of thousands of reference images. New Masters was the first. Our structure, our interactive classes that don't cost anything extra, the track system. There's so many things that New Masters Academy has been leading in art education. And so that innovation is not something that happened a decade ago. That innovation is happening right now. So some of you know that there's been a version 3.0 of the New Masters Academy website that's been in beta. We're exiting the beta. That's the announcement. So on September 1st, the version 3 of New Masters Academy is going to become live. So there's not going to be the standard side and the beta and you switch back and forth, and it's just going to be live. I can talk a little bit about these features. It's faster. That's the big thing. It's faster. It's up to 500% faster. That's huge. It's built natively in React. So it's got sort of a Web 3.0 framework. It's just more reliable and quicker. The navigation has been improved. The course guide, which is the structure for New Masters Academy, that's your 4-year program in illustration or comics or whatever you're going into. That is now not just in the PDF format and the interactives on Discord. That's now going to be integrated into the actual site. So the site's going to be presented in this sort of order of going through the tracks as a default, and it's going to be much more well integrated. New 3D viewer, which works on mobile and works on any computer. That's new. It's not just the pro version of the 3D viewer. We now have that. There's a new version of the image viewer, which loads fast and is tiled, so you can look at these 100 plus megapixel images, just like Google Cultural Arts Project. You can now zoom in on that stuff. You can make your own collections of courses and image sets and 3D models and more, so you can organize your own content. There's better progress tracking and monitoring of your progress and showing you your activity, which is really useful in a more sophisticated way. Live class schedules integrated seamlessly into the website. So we got courses, we got live classes, we have community events. All that is getting integrated into the website better in the new version. There's a light mode and a dark mode, which people have been asking for a decade. We finally have that. And so now we're also doing, this is what I'm really excited about. Our courses are now available in a range of languages. So now in the subtitles, and we're going to keep expanding on this, you can watch it in several different languages, the subtitles in several different languages. The entire catalog is going to be translated into as many languages as we can, but that's a process that's been started, and you're going to see that now. So if you're a non-native English speaker, consider switching to the language of your choice. It'll help you understand the content. We're going to be moving into audio versions of that in the future using AI, in order to do AI dubbing. A lot of other really exciting stuff. Over the next few months, there's going to be a lot of big improvements to the V3 site after the launch on September 1st. Some of the things that we need to get through this launch in order to do is having an app so you could do offload viewing. That's a really highly requested. So if you're on a train and you don't have Wi-Fi or whatever, you can, just like Netflix and some of these other, large apps for these big entertainment services, you can download content to view it offline. Same thing with the images and stuff. We're going to be able to do a randomized drawing. So we actually have a timed drawing viewer. So you can go into the reference images and set the timer, and it'll give you a timed thing with the New Masters references, which are the best in the world. But we are also going to be adding like randomization and being able to like randomize from multiple image sets. We're going to be doing on-demand art assistance and assignment guidance through the website. So if you get stuck on a specific part, there's a way for you to get help through the site. That's just a small snapshot. We've got so much coming when it comes to the actual website, when it comes to accreditation, when it comes to structure. The community has just exploded. So if you're watching this and you're not on the New Masters Academy Discord, you are completely missing out. Like the New Masters Academy Discord is where that's like the most exciting place where there's the most energy, I think, in the entire art world. So if you're not on the Discord, you don't have to be a subscriber. It's free. It's the only social media I pay attention to. It's so lit. You got to get over here. We have our instructors there. We have a huge community of supportive artists. It's an amazing team. And also we have all these amazing community events, just like this one we're doing right now. So there's always something exciting going on. Don't learn in isolation. You're much more likely to quit. You're going to get worse results. Utilize the community, utilize the interactive offerings that you're already getting if you're a subscriber. Utilize as much of the human element as you can, because content, no matter how good it is, we've got thousands of hours. We got the best content on art. Learning art, the content's not enough. And that's something we found over the years. You really need that interactive community, that support. And one of the best ways of getting that is going to the New Masters Academy Discord. Thank you so much. We are going to have a stream with Caleb in 30 at the top of the hour. We're going to have a stream. I think we're going to have more details on that. Caleb, I got him in the chat here. Can you tell me a little bit about the stream? I need information on that. But Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. As always, I love these conversations that we have. Looks like, so yeah, I see it right here. There's a link if you're on the Demio for the V3 Q&A. That's going to be with Caleb at the top of the hour. So if you're curious there's a lot of features with New Masters Academy that people don't know about. Maybe Caleb, you could introduce that stream real quick, and then we can wrap it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be in about 15 minutes here. So the link's in the events on the Discord. So just meet us there to learn more about the new
Thank you
site.
so much, Glenn, for joining us, and hopefully we can have more
You're welcome,
conversations
Thank
like
you.
this. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks, everybody.